Verse 1, Esther chapter 2. Later, when the anger of King Xerxes had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. After Xerxes' defeat to Greece, he returned in deep dejection to his palace. After his misery was the absence of his queen and the fact that the law of the Medes and Persians could not be altered even by the king himself. Vashti, in other words, could never be his queen again. Friends, we must turn to secular history for the campaign of Xerxes against the Greeks, since the Bible gives us no record of this entire campaign. Xerxes, he led a great army against the Greeks. The secret of the strength of the Persians was in numbers, but the individual Persian soldier was not as well trained as the individual Greek soldier. The Greeks emphasized the individual, and as a result, one Greek soldier could take on, they say, 10 Persian soldiers. So friends, at the Battle of Thermopylae, only a few men could get in the narrow pass. As a result, the Greeks won a single victory over the entire Persian army. It was a rather unfortunate defeat for Xerxes, but God was behind the whole thing. He was overruling. The power was about to pass from Persia to Greece. Greece would soon become the superpower of those days. After his defeat and in his loneliness, he paces up and down in the palace every day. He's thinking of Vashti, his wife. But the law that has been made concerning the queen cannot be revoked. The attendants know the king's state of mind, and they are watching him. And they really know that something must be done as soon as possible. Therefore, we read verse 2. Then the king's personal attendants proposed, "Let a search be made for beautiful young maidens for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful girls into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them." In these two verses, friends, verses 2 and 3, we notice that the members of the king's office, who were occupying high positions, noticed the loneliness of the king. So they make suggestions that the entire kingdom should be searched for women who were beautiful, and that they be brought from far and near, and that from all these hundreds of women chosen, one could be selected to take the place of Vashti as the queen of Persia. Now you notice verse 4. Then let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. The advice that Vashti be replaced by another young girl. The king was to be the judge, the sole judge for this contest. Verse 5. Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin, named Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish. The story, friends, in the book of Esther, to this point, has just been the window dressing, the stage props, if you want it that way. We have had a glimpse into a pagan heathen court. We have been introduced to the happenings there for a very definite purpose. It explains how Esther came to the throne. Because she became queen, she was able to intervene and intercede on behalf of her people. The entire people would have been exterminated at that time had it not been for her who occupied that position next to the throne of Persia. We will begin to see the hand of God now in a very beautiful way moving in the palace of King Xerxes. Up to this point, there has been nothing actually spiritual in the palace. It was a godless place. It was godless as anything else could be. We are going to see now that in such a dark situation, God's hand of providence would move so decisively. He is arranging the events so that at the proper time, God will have someone to intervene on behalf of his people. Actually, our story begins with a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai. He was of the tribe of Benjamin. The question that immediately arises is, what is this Mordecai doing here? He belonged to the royal family of Israel. He is from the tribe of Benjamin, which is the family of Saul. Verse 6. Who had been carried into exile, this Mordecai, from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jehoiachin, king of Israel. God, friends, had permitted his people to return to their own land. He had prophesied through Isaiah. Cyrus had given a decree to permit them to return, and those who were in the will of God did return to Palestine. However, a few returned to their homeland, only a few. The greater number of them had made a place for themselves in the land of their captivity. Why? Because they liked it there. When they were free to go, they did not want to return to their homeland. Many of them, out of the will of God, chose to remain, and Mordecai happened to be one of them. He should have been back in the land of Israel. Notice where he is, in the palace of King Xerxes, rather than in the land of freedom. He's in a place of bondage, and that too in the heart of bondage. You may remember that Joseph had a government job in Egypt. Yet he was in the will of God, directly in the center of God's will. Daniel in the court of Babylon was also in the center of God's will. But here, Mordecai is not in the direct will of God. You will see that in the book of Esther, the providence of God and the God of providence is exalted. As I've said, a popular definition of providence is how God coaches us on a very slow track. This man Mordecai is going to be brought home, although he is out of the will of God, and although he is not looking to God for help. Even at a time when you think he and his people would return and turn to God, strangely, they do not. There is no mention of God or of prayer in the entire book of Esther, because these people are out of the will of God. Friends, both Mordecai and Esther come on the pages of Scripture starting in a very poor light, although they are very high-type individuals. As we shall see later on in the story, Mordecai was taken captive, probably at a very young age, maybe in the second deportation of captives that left Jerusalem. That was during the reign of Jeconiah, better known as Jehoiachin. The first deportation that left Jerusalem, remember, was made up of princes, the nobility, the upper class. Daniel was in that group. The second captivity took out those, shall we say, of the middle class. This man, Mordecai, was in that group. After the third deportation, when Jerusalem was finally destroyed, only the poorest class was left in the land of Jerusalem. Mordecai had a cousin whose parents may have been slain when Nebuchadnezzar took the city. For multitudes, we know, were slain during that assault of Nebuchadnezzar against the Holy Land. Esther chapter 2 and verse 7. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadashah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This girl, who was also known as Esther, was lovely in form and features. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. Esther, we see, her Hebrew name was Hadashah. It means star. She certainly was a star, a very beautiful woman according to scripture. Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter. Her one great asset was her beauty. When the announcement was made that there was to be a choice of another queen, for Xerxes, immediately Mordecai became interested. His position in the palace, no doubt, gave him the opportunity to see the different girls that are brought from all over the kingdom to enter this contest to become the next queen. And I'm sure he compared each of them with Esther and decided that none of them were as beautiful as his adopted daughter. Now we come to verses 8 and 9. When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many girls were brought to the citadel of Susa, put under the care of Hegai. Esther also was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Hegai, who had charge of the harem. The girl pleased him and won his favor immediately, and he provided her beauty treatments and special food. He assigned her to 7 maids selected from the king's palace and moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem. Notice this expression in verse 9. The girl pleased him and found his favor immediately. You would find this phrase occurring and reoccurring throughout the entire book of Esther, because Esther not only found favor with God, consequently, she found favor with man. That's the key, friends. Once you find favor with God, you will certainly find favor with man. You can see the providence of God moving into this section. Mordecai took his young cousin Esther and entered her in this contest to be the next queen. We can see God taking command of the situation. Esther was brought to the king's house. She pleased Hegai, the keeper of the women. She obtained kindness from him, favor, and he gave her everything she needed to help make her even more beautiful. Now verse 10. Esther had not revealed her nationality and her family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Verse 10. Remember, friends, that the Jews were a captive people. Anti-Semitism always had been a curse in the nations of the world. You cannot read the account of Nebuchadnezzar's destruction of Jerusalem without realizing his hatred for these people. It was also he who brought them to Babylon, and he is no longer on the scene now. A new nation has charge of these people from Israel, the Jews. Yet, the anti-Semitic feeling remains very strong. Mordecai, being very sensitive to that, wants Esther never to reveal her nationality or her family background. This silence is tantamount to a denial of her faith, because faith persuasion is the thing that has identified these people throughout history, down through the years. The moment Mordecai and Esther denied their nationality, it was at that moment, in a very significant and poignant way, they denied their faith and even the God of their faith by remaining in the land of captivity. Friends, both these people, Mordecai and his adopted daughter Esther, were clearly out of the will of God. Verse 11. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. Mordecai, his concern. When you are in the will of God, you can rest in the fact that God is causing all things to work together for good. But you notice Mordecai is not resting in God because I believe he's out of God's will. He's pacing up and down. He wonders if he has not made a terrible blunder and mistake by entering Esther in this contest. He's absolutely frightened at what he has done. When you're out of God's will, you will not rest, friends. Are you restless? Are you out of God's will? You know, friends, at this point, Mordecai has not, nor can he be put into God's hands. I'm sure that he knew everything and anything about the providence of God. However, God, in his mercy, is not going to judge Mordecai and Esther. He's going to overrule the situation. Providence is the way God leads us, friends. Man is led by God's providence. It is not because of us, but in spite of us. We see God beginning to move at this particular point. It is no accident that Esther is given the most prominent place, and she is shown every favor and given every consideration. There are no accidents with God. Notice now the type of beautification that went on. When God does something, friends, He always does it perfectly. Not in our timing, but He's always an on-time God. Verse 12, before a girl's turn came to go to the king Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women. Before a girl went to the king, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatment. 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. In Esther's case, God permitted all of this only because of His providence. Her entrance into the contest, her acceptance by the man in charge of the contestants, were all ordered by God. Haggai, keeper of the women, thought Esther looked like a winner. So he put her in the front before all the other women. It was a step forward, not in Haggai's program, but in God's program. Not an accident, not a coincidence, but God's providence. God's providence was overruling in the nation and also in Esther's personal life. Esther's God, we see, is a God of faithfulness, a God of providence, and therefore a God of faithfulness. When this God begins to move, there is always hope, my friend. Whatever your situation in life, when this God begins to move, there is hope. In the midst of despair, there was hope. There's something about light that enables us to survive longer. Hold on to Jesus, the light of the world. May God bless you, friends. God bless you.